Hello, everyone, and welcome. We have a thought starter session here today. So we're going to be exploring rising to the top, career trajectories and critical competencies. I am very happy to be joined today by a stellar panel. So we're going to kick off by introducing to we have Karma, who is the CFO of the University of Canberra. We have Rob Patterson, who is the CFO of Employment Hero. And we also have Andrew, who is the CFO of Oricon. So thank you very much all for joining. Just a quick, again, a big thank you to our sponsors, McKay Goodwin, Huddled, Easy Collect, Elena Bennett, EXL Cloud, Fathom, My Accounts, FShaw, and finally, CFO Magazine. So thank you very much for supporting the CFO Summit. Quick one, please, we like these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So highly recommend using the chat function below or popping it in the Q&A there. All right, so let's kick off. I am very, very pleased that we've actually got such a broad spectrum of CFOs here with us today. So Karma, Andrew, Rob, I mean, looking at your backgrounds, we've got, engineering unicorn, tech unicorns, universities, construction in Dubai, England, Australia, and across Asia. So we're really lucky to have you here to contribute your valuable insights on the essential skills and knowledge that's needed to excel in a career in finance. So perhaps Karma, if I could hand over to you, and if you could just give us a little background over your history and experiences.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Adriana. So I'm one of those strange accountants who's never worked in an accounting practice. I've never worked in a big four or whatever, I think it was big six, big eight at one point, but I've never worked in an accounting practice because I like projects too much. So I like working on things that have a beginning, middle, and end. So I started out studying and working in a management consultancy, and then I spent a number of years working in property. Now, property is quite exciting because it really is a project, right? You're building things out of the ground, and that took me overseas. So building things out of the sand. But it was over there that I actually shifted gears and moved into a role that was in education, and I found working for an organisation with a purpose that I could really connect with made a huge difference. And so coming back to Australia, I was looking for something that kind of had that edge to it, and then landed in a university where you kind of have 5 businesses in one. So for me, it's all about working through kind of projects and working through things. I don't want to sit there doing tax returns, although I still love that old H&R block where the person does the yes at the end of it. And if I get to the end of a tricky problem in an Excel spreadsheet, you probably see me do the same.
That's great. And how about you, Rob, before you were... I don't know. I feel like that is a mouse. Maybe it's a puppy. But before you were working at Employment Hero, maybe you could give us a bit of an overview about how that led you, how you ended up there.
Yeah. Thanks for the intro and an opportunity to talk today. My name is Rob Patterson. I'm the CFO at Employment Hero. I've actually got 25 years experience in finance roles. Feels like a lot longer. I'm different to Karma. I actually started in audit. I spent 5 years in audit in the UK and in Australia, but I've spent the last 20 years in tech and software businesses. The last of which I've spent, the last 8 years I've spent at Employment Hero. And Employment Hero is basically if you're not aware, a HR, payroll and benefits software for SMB customers. And yeah, we've basically overseen massive expansion, international launches. We've raised, I think, 6 rounds of capital in total, made 2 acquisitions, and yeah, still continuing to grow. And yeah, that's what gets me out of bed. There's always a challenge in this business.
What, you don't miss those days of audit? You didn't want to go back to that?
I was one of the nice auditors. Yep.
And last but certainly not least, Andrew.
So I think thanks for having us on today. I think maybe my background might actually be a combination of both Karma and Rob's. I also, for my sins, did start as an auditor back in the day. I actually started with an accounting firm straight out of high school and did like a cadetship, and so actually did all my university part-time whilst working at an accounting firm. And in some ways that, put me a few years ahead once I'd actually got to that graduate stage. I didn't necessarily think the auditing life was for me forever, so I did jump from there pretty quickly into business. And a bit like Karma, my sort of original lot in life has really been in property and within sort of construction, and now with Oricon in engineering. And I think that's been, to me, all about finding projects, people, organisations that have, actually there's an impact there. There's a real physical thing that you can see, and for a lot of times I've been quite drawn to sort of, I guess, the more practical sides of business. I've done probably a reasonably traditional sort of maybe finance sort of career path in various finance manager and accounting roles. I was a financial controller for a while. I've been CFO of global organisations, and I've been a COO for a while, and now I'm back as I'm the CFO at Oricon. So plenty of variety, plenty of countries in between, and here we are.
Absolutely. I think what you touched on there, I guess, that the variety, I think, is what's probably going to come out of this session. And I hate to break it to the audience, but I don't think there is going to be one silver bullet or one particular characteristic that means you are going to excel in as a CFO. There's probably going to be different reasons for different businesses, and different businesses call for a different type of CFO. So I'm really interested in sort of understanding perhaps what might be unique in those industries, but also might be something that's quite generic that we can apply across all industries. Maybe starting with you this time, Andrew, from starting out in sort of, as you mentioned, multiple accounting roles. You moved into the financial controller role and other CFO roles before taking on that CFO mantle at Oricon. And I believe I read, you have a finance team of a couple of hundred. Could you perhaps speak to what made those continued promotions possible? I
don't know. Maybe there's probably a bit of luck in all that, but I think the main thing for me was always being keen to explore when that opportunity did come up. I think there's something in being, I always like to think of myself more as, just the accountant, but always having that interest or that passion for the business, for wanting to understand more around what it made it tick, what made things work, all those sort of things. And I think that always put me in good stead to be able to, talk well of what was going on in a particular piece that I was looking after. And say yes when the next opportunity came along. I think that to me is a key bit. I think in a couple of times I got asked to go and work in the US, so that was all fine. Then they're all a little bit quiet, and then next thing I got a call 2 days later and said, "Oh, actually, no, go to London because we've got this particular deal." And it was all like, okay, yep, sure. So I think for me that curiosity to always want to understand more around than just the finances, and then being really open to those opportunities as they come.
And Karma, I understand you worked in commercial property sector through to non-for-profits in, as you mentioned, Australia and Abu Dhabi. How do you motivate and lead a team? And did you notice that perhaps changed in different companies and countries?
Good question. I think it's all about connection. So it's understanding your people. I've been lucky that I've had really good teams to work with, and we've been able to joke around a bit. Yes, it did change a little bit when you go overseas, my first role in Abu Dhabi, I was the only native English speaker in the team. So that's a very big difference. But, you know, at the end of the day, we all have similarities. So it's finding that kind of common cause. I think at one stage we all had a discussion on the various sizes and shapes of weddings from our different cultures. And so that created a bit of a connection because I had 50 people at my wedding. One of the guys I worked with in Abu Dhabi had 5,000. He had his whole village there. So it's just developing that connection and not always talking about debits and credits and what we're doing, but creating that relationship outside of the ledger, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's the same, but you just, again, you've got to understand your audience. And so the audience in different parts of the world is going to be a little bit different. But I think that served me well to understand the different cultures and then come back here.
It may be oversimplifying, but it seems that both of you are really, you keep talking about making connections with the people, but also, as Andrew said, making connections with what the business is trying to achieve. So looking at things, it's beyond the numbers. I mean, slightly changing tack, but Rob, I mean, Employment Heroes, you said you've got a long history in working in high growth companies. I'm sure there's quite a few people that are tuning in that are thinking maybe they are interested in working in a scale-up business. Do you have any advice of how they can manage up and demonstrate that they do have the skills necessary for that sort of next management position?
Yeah, sure. I'm probably echoing sort of some of the thoughts that Andrew and or some of the themes that Andrew and Karma are already talking about, but I think it's about taking an initiative and being proactive in your roles effectively. I think, you know, it's important that no one else can drive your career. You know, you're the person driving your career. It's like, you know, it's a common sense approach. What I'm saying is, but some people, you know, who are a lot brighter than me sit back in their roles and for one reason or the other they don't want to push on in their careers. But I've always taken the initiative. I've always been inquisitive and been proactive in like all of my roles to make sure you know that you can level up in your career and you can move upwards. When I joined Employment Hero, I think it was part of a sort of 3 different companies. We only had, I think, 100 people in the business. Now we've got something like 700 people in just in Employment Hero alone, and I've had to level up. But you know, I've had to take the initiative myself to do that, and no one else can do that. And you know, when you're in a high growth environment as well, there's a lot of ambiguity. So you need to be adaptable and embrace change. I think that's like a couple of important themes. If you're a steady as you go type person, you're not going to be able to move up the ranks.
And do you think that that's sort of that idea of going beyond your role and I definitely agree. I mean, in Wheel, we talk about this idea of collective accountability. You know, if you notice something that's broken or could be better, just go and do it. Do you think that in a more established or a more corporate environment, do you think that would still be welcomed in a finance function, that idea of like, or do you think there's more of a standoff, respect and
it
wait?
might be a question for the other parties, because I've sort of not, that's not my, I don't really want to work in a sort of more corporate environment. I like working those environments where you can see, you can make a change, you can make a difference. I'd never raised capital before when I was at Employment Hero, but I just made it my job to, that's what we needed to do. And I just worked out how to do it and, lent on a few people externally, and, you don't know what you don't know. So you just got to move yourself out your comfort zone a lot of the time. But maybe Andrew and Karma can
I'd be interested Andrew or Karma, if you had any thoughts to that.
I mean, I think it's always the same, right? I think, I've worked in big corporates as for a big part of my career, and it's been the same, right? Even within that big corporate, there's still small teams, there's still connections to make, there's still areas to explore within your team. I think I wouldn't be going into a big corporate saying I'm going to be the the group CFO next week as the new starter. But certainly there's opportunity in any team, I think, to push. And I would have thought if you're a leader who's got a team of people, you want that, right? I wouldn't want my team or teams I work with just to all sit back, not waiting to be asked, as opposed to pushing, because that's how we all grow and develop, right?
Yeah, I'd echo that. Kind of saying yes to things when they come along, right? And I think, Andrew, you said that before. I wouldn't have ended up in the Middle East if I hadn't answered my phone to a private phone call on a Thursday night when a recruiter was calling me. Now, you got to say yes and go with the flow if it feels right, and kind of step outside your comfort zone and actually push a little bit more. And I think that applies regardless of which environment in. It's just going to be to what degree you can push.
Do you think I'm quite interested there in the idea of saying yes to the opportunities and getting outside of your comfort zone. Now, I am very much generalizing, and I do, please forgive me, but how do you think that people that they might be more comfortable with numbers, and they, as you mentioned before, the debits and credits, how can you encourage and feel confident that they can take that next step? Perhaps Karma, if you could give some advice there on what people should do if they think they can do it, but a little bit too nervous or trepidatious.
I think you've got to work out a way of kind of dipping your toe a little bit. And this is where everybody has a different risk profile. When I moved back to Australia, I came back to Australia with no house, no job, and 4 animals to kind of to live. And I had people saying to me, how can you do that? I could never do that. So I think it's working out with your career or with a job. How do you take that first small step and find somebody that you can connect with to take that first small step? Because I think while we're generally seen as black and white, I think we're increasingly working in the grey, and we want people who can work in the grey. So again, it's the old cliche, believe in yourself and do it. But I think you've just got to trust and play around with it a little bit. Some of that, I think, comes with age, that you get worried a little bit. You worry less about what others think when you've had a few years in your career. So I think it's how can we develop that in others? And that means that we as leaders also need to support our teams to foster that environment. So I think that there is a responsibility on us as well.
Karma, I did see that you have some qualifications in psychology. Is that correct? Do you think that?
Psychology is a very big word. I'm going to say I did a diploma in neuro-linguistic programming, which is down the psychology sphere. I did that because now I know that study's changing a little bit now, but back when I did my CA, it was all about ethics and super and tax, and it's all the black and white stuff. 95% of what I do now, 95% of what I've been doing for the last probably 15 to 20 years has been working with people and understanding their motivations. So the technical stuff I think is quite easy, but we need to learn how to work with people. And so this to me seemed a logical step to kind of get in and understand a bit more about mindset and how different people learn. So I didn't want to go and do a teaching degree, but some people work visually, some people like to listen to things. So it's just having a look at a different path to see how I can develop connections a little bit more to help with my financial storytelling, but perhaps we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we've really touched on the importance of sort of leadership and understanding your people and your team and what they care about. And Andrew, you mentioned before about understanding what the business is trying to achieve and going beyond what your current role is. Do you have any advice for our aspiring CFOs on how they can kind of make space to think about perhaps the future of the company and how maybe finance can support what that strategic goal is?
I think it's a good question, because I think what happens is you do get hung up in the detail, the doing a lot, and you know we get all that all the time. I think it's probably easier for me to make space because I give other people the less space. but I think you can. One sort of thing that I always sort of think about is making sure that you're spending time. You know, you might have pulled a piece of work together or whatever it is, and you've spent all that time to make sure it's right. But then it's like, okay, why? What's the point of what we're trying to do? What are we trying to achieve by this piece? If I present this a certain way, what's going to be the outcome? And you know, it doesn't take much to just think about those sort of things slightly differently. But that's actually what it really means when you start thinking about strategically, right? So what are we going to use this piece of work for? Is it, you know, is it going to drive a certain outcome? And then you start to think more around, actually, well, you know, maybe I don't need to do that, or I can, you know, spend more time on that element of it. And I think it's just the way you think about some of those things sometimes makes sense. I mean, obviously you got to think about how you set yourself up to succeed in your work and the way you manage your time and do all those things. But I think once you've done that, it's how do you take a bit of a different thinking around, you know, what it is you're actually working on, and you know, think more about the why as opposed to the what.
Absolutely. Something that I am definitely guilty of doing. I kind of go to our CEO and I'm like, obviously I'm leading the marketing team, and I'm like, great, we got this, or unfortunately this happened. And he's like, but why did that happen? And you go so much into So anyway, so ask why is my takeaway here. Try to get a hypothesis for why. Rob, something that I think you and I often struggle with, me more in marketing, but I presume you in finance, is how do you balance those sort of short-term objectives and long-term strategic objectives? So, you know, I guess for you, these short-term financial goals and deadlines versus, you know, what you need to focus on the long-term strategic focus. Could you talk me a little bit about how you go about those two?
Yeah, sure. Not easy things to do, definitely. I think with that strategic piece and strategic thinking that you just sort of touched upon, I think that's just a given really in any role. Like especially when you're head of finance or in a CFO role, we are the eyes and ears of the business. We're the partner to the CEO, so we know the full picture. So that does help making decisions across the whole business. But in terms of the short term, I have a lens on just, you know, what's going on day to day. But so I do a lot of scenario planning. I look at taking calculated risks that, you know, might fit, and then what we do constantly is like iterate on those experiments or investments or whatever you want to do in the business, and make sure they're tracking against the guidelines that we've set for ourselves. And then we've got basically frameworks in place to say, look, we need to invest harder here, or we need to pull back here. So it's a constant iteration for us, to be honest. No different to almost being, you know, it being like in a marketing team doing an experiment, or even in the product team. But it's really about having a realistic view on performance as well. I think that's where finance is particularly strong and needs to be very strong on in their looking at short-term goals that feed into the sort of long-term business.
And maybe, Carmo, I mean, if we can see the benefits of sort of strategic thinking and setting time aside, both for the growth of the business, but also for the individual and their personal their growth. Can you maybe flip to the dark side and talk through, you know, what are the potential risks or pitfalls that a CFO may face if they're lacking that sort of strong strategic thinking skills, and how could they sort of mitigate this?
It's a good question. There is the dark side. Many people moving up into a CFO role might be coming up through the ranks. So it's making sure that you can shift away from the detail. If you don't have strategic and a strategic view, if you can't see the big picture and you're stuck in the detail, you miss linking those connections. So my fear is that the business could get left behind. If you're not strategic thinking, you're going to miss out on looking at what AI can do. You might miss out on what competitors are doing. So I think I don't know that you can afford to miss out. I'm going to say I don't know that there is a mitigation. The mitigation is find some time to do the strategic thinking. And even if it's only a minute here or there, because if you plant a seed in here, and you might not have the answer, how many times as you're falling asleep, you're like, oh, I've got this great idea, or you wake up at 3 a.m., but you need that time to plant the seed first. I now find I have like note-taking apps on my phone. I've got notebooks by the bed, just because I might have what I think is a really good idea. I wake up, I write it down. In the morning, look, it might be rubbish, but if I didn't write it down, I wouldn't remember it. So I think for me, and I know it's a challenge for me because we're all in an environment now where we're under-resourced and we've got more and more to do, but even finding those small gaps of time where you can just plant a seed and think about something, your brain's often working on it in the background, so who knows how it will grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I may know the answer because you did touch on this before, Karma. And I did Google you and quite a few articles came up, but I'm interested to know if, if I am correct, what from your perspective is one of the most crucial skills of a CFO?
I'm going to say turning the numbers into stories, which financial storytelling, however you want to say it. A number in and of itself is only a number. So every number represents something, right? So it's finding out what that represents and how you can talk to it. So Andrew spoke before about getting to the why. It's getting to the why. What is happening behind the numbers? And too many people, I think these days, the onus is always on finance for non-finance managers, right? So we're telling the others that they need to learn our language. Why can't we convert or translate what we're saying into their language and understand it? I've been in countless meetings with tax specialists and business owners. We're all speaking English and yet I'm translating. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space. Where I think we need to learn a little bit more. We don't need to refer to an accounting standard. What is the gist of what's going on and what is it going to mean for the person that it's affecting?
Maybe Rob, could you add some color? I'm sure I can imagine some, but you some examples of where the financial storytelling has come into play for you in your career.
Yeah, sure. It's something I've had to work really hard on, to be honest. It doesn't come naturally to me. Much rather be just stuck in a spreadsheet or managing the team.
Same.
But
love
yeah,
those spreadsheets.
You're lying. Now, where it's been important for me is just with investor relations. It's been really important to keep things simple, think about what an investor wants, what they want to hear, what our numbers are. Hopefully they're in tracking to what we think the investors want to hear. And really, when you can do it well, it means you can basically influence them. It builds trust, it basically helps the relationship move along.
And Andrew, from your perspective, can you share some steps about how you have been able to take those that perhaps are not as financially literate on a journey through data?
Well, what we tried to do, because that's a constant challenge, right? Particularly now because there's so much data, right? So how do you actually draw out anything in that data that makes sense? What we actually call one of our core sort of reasons for being in the finance function is that sense maker, and so it is how do you take the data and what we actually did was we actually at one stage we took our sort of business strategy and literally went through it and said, right, if that's the strategy, almost, and then design sort of, okay, well, that's what we want to try and do. Therefore, that's what we care about. Therefore, this is important to us. And we actually designed a series of questions and almost set up a lot of our reporting and a lot of our things almost as a series of questions. And it's not, is the revenue number higher than last month sort of questions. It's, are we growing in the right areas? Are we, it's sort of more related to the strategy. And doing that was all about trying to make sure that we could get people to focus on things that really drove the strategy. So that's been quite a powerful way of doing it in a quite a practical sense around just simple stories, and you're almost explaining the results to people in a way that they go, oh yeah, okay, I get why I need to drive that, because that's going to give me this and this sort of thing. So that's one example. But I think every day is a story. I think almost everything we do, you're creating an argument for something, or you're presenting an argument. You're not presenting a result, or you're presenting whatever. You're presenting an argument. Right?
And Karma, do you have any advice on how those that might be really financially literate but feel quite nervous about becoming a successful financial storyteller?
I'm going to say, I know I love the word financial storyteller. I think people get scared by it. We're accountants and we love frameworks. And so what are the steps that we need to follow to become a financial storyteller? I don't think it's as easy as that. I think it's a skill that you develop over time. So it's going to be start small, right? And know your audience. Start small with things like, don't report your numbers to 2 decimal places if you're doing a high level summary. Keep it at a high level. So what is the real message or the real information that you're trying to impart? Do you have stop using jargon? So keep your numbers simple, stop using jargon, and maybe see if you've got any metaphors or analogies that you can use to give people a kind of a similarity, or have people understand what it is. I think a couple of years ago, going into the pandemic, as I was giving a budget presentation, I said, look, developing this budget and going into this year is a bit like driving along a country road at night, and I can only see as far as my headlights. Given I live in Canberra, you never know when a kangaroo is going to jump out. Now, my audience all live around here. A lot of us live rurally, and so they immediately understood what I meant by that. You know what happened? Throughout that budget process, all of a sudden, everybody was giving me driving analogies the whole time. So every time we were doing a forecast or we were doing something, there'd be talk about handbrakes or headlights or all sorts of things. But it made it a little bit fun, and it also meant that people became engaged. So I don't know that we need to find the once upon a time and the whole, what we consider a story, but there are certain tips and tricks that we can do to humanize it a little bit more.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's one final note which I found I always struggle with, because I always think, oh, is there a right or a wrong? But Andrew, I really like that point there about, you're presenting an argument. You're presenting you're looking with as much data that you have to present a view on it. And maybe that part, the fact that it's not exactly right or wrong, that's where the nerves come out. So I think if you know that it's just an argument, perhaps that gives people some more comfort to, comfort to give a crack and delve into that. We've touched a lot on, the education and the skill set, some qualitative skill sets that you need, but there's sort of the intersection of the two, which I think of technology. And as technology continues to evolve, particularly with, the rise of generative AI, Karma, what effects have you seen on the finance industry, and have you had to, adjust or incorporate to any of these shifts?
I don't know. So where we are, we're still using an old finance system. We're still, the fact that we've kind of gone from manual approvals to workflows is a challenge for us. So I think there are a lot of teams that are still quite behind. And so we hear about all these other people moving forward. And I think maybe we get quite worried, or we hear about it, but we don't see it happening to us. So we're not sure. I think we are in a phase where everything is sped up quite substantially. I know for me, and there was an interesting discussion this morning on AI. So For me, I'm using it to give me rubbish first drafts for things. So to give me ideas on things. If you're doing presentations, it's really good at doing digital art if you can't find a graph or a picture or something. So I think where we are is playing around the edges a little bit at the moment, but I think we're going to start to see that shift before we realise it. I mean, I can't remember the last time I took money out of a bank. Now, I didn't do that intentionally. I just started paying with everything on my phone. So I don't know that we're consciously going to see, right, one day we're doing this, the next day we've flicked a switch. I think it's going to happen alongside us.
I think that's quite a comforting thought. I mean, our CFO said the other day, he's like, well, I'm going to leave that to the experts. I'll play around with the edges. I'm not an AI expert, but I'm hoping it will come to me. So maybe that's a comforting thought to other people who are concerned that they're falling behind, or, play around with the edges, get comfortable with the concepts. But yeah, maybe, yes, it will come to you, which I quite like. Robert, working in a tech company, do you have a differing view? I mean, are you seeing anything else in your finance team and towards, the adoption of AI?
Nothing major just yet. Like we are using it around the edges, just like some of the examples Karma was talking about, but nothing major just yet. I mean, we've got some tools that we use around AP and coding and things like that use some sort of forms of AI, but I'm really excited to see what else there is. There's definitely going to be a lot of innovation in this space and keen to adopt it. And I think, look, for us as a business and a finance team in particular, anything we can do to automate workflows and approvals and make sort of like manual processes redundant, we're keen to do, and we've been doing that, throughout the time I've been in the business.
Andrew, do you have any thoughts? Have you noticed that sort of the reliance on technology can vary depending on the industry that you're working in?
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of starting to embrace this sort of technology that's coming, right? So it's sort of like when from a career perspective, one of the things we talked about, this is a few years back now, we put some robotics into some of our process automation and those sort of things. And at the time we had a big shared services center in Manila, and we talked to them about, there is a reality that their role at some point in time would get taken by a robot, was basically the discussion. But we shifted the thinking then to being, okay, well, you can work with these tools, you can understand how it works, you can become robot managers or whatever you want to become, and then all of a sudden you've actually grown a new career, and you've all of a sudden, it's embraced a whole new world of things for those people that might have just fallen away. I think I did hear a quote, and I can't remember where it was, but I've stolen it, was where, so AI won't take your job, but someone who understands AI better than you will. And I thought that was a really good way of explaining it. Like if you think about how, start to explore these things and play with it. I quite like that one. So
yes. We've got a few questions coming in, so I might just have a quick run through. So we've just got a question here from Arthur. So if you were starting again, what university degree do you think would best equip you for today's environment? Maybe Rob, start off with you.
You're asking the wrong person, because I got a geography degree in the UK, because degrees are not very vocational in the UK. Look, I think if someone's really interested in finance, I would honestly considering how much it costs to go to university today, I would consider getting a cadetship and working or doing part-time uni is the best way to jump in today. A bit controversial there, but yeah.
What do you think?
I might jump in there because I was.
Oh, sorry. No, you're from a university. Sorry.
I am, but no, I was just going to say what you were just saying, because Andrew, you said you did a cadetship, so you were working. Yeah. Now, I did my degree part-time, so I was working. So I was paying my degree as I was working. So I everybody learns differently, but I would highly recommend learning and doing at the same time. So it's either having an ability to do kind of placements as part of your degree, or have an ability where you're working in something that is related to what you're studying so that you can apply the concepts as you're going through. For me, I think that just, it gives you a more well-rounded basis. And to be honest, then if you're already working, you have an understanding of what you're doing, there's potential to change your trajectory. So you might start off doing a commerce degree that's majoring in accounting or finance or something, and you kind of go through, and as you tweak it or finesse it and you're working, you can change your electives. I think I started off doing arts commerce, then I changed and I was doing accounting and marketing. Now those two things don't go together, but maybe that was the birthplace of the financial storytelling. And then you look at me now where I've done some NLP. So I also don't think you can't put all your eggs on what you do at university, because it's lifelong learning now. So everything is changing, and so you're always topping up. But start off with what you're interested in. But if you've got an ability to work and study concurrently, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'm actually going through this with my son's going to university next year, and we're trying to work out what he does, right? And I'm shocked how much opportunity there is now for. I don't think I'd work out how I'd ever make a choice about what to study and where to start, right? So I think, as Carmen said, follow your passion to begin with. I think that's obviously one. You've got to do something that you're interested in, but yeah, I think the opportunity to add things to it as well is interesting. So I don't think my son will be a CFO anytime soon, but he'll probably end up doing economics, but then he's into multimedia and those sort of things. And so he is combining at the moment, seems to be combining a couple of things. I think I'm biased, but business and economics does give a good grounding for a lot of other things, I think. So
well, we've got another question similar to based on formal education. Do you think, let's start with Karma, do you think undertaking further studies like an MBA is valuable for a CFO in today's environment?
Me with my university hat on, of course, go for it and roll in additional study, especially in Canberra. I think it depends on where you're at and what you've done. So I've looked at MBAs in the past and went, probably not for me. But if I look at what I've done, I did CA, then I went on and did CIMA. So I did another professional qualification that had a different kind of nuance, and I've done some other kind of add-ons. So I don't know, for me, I'm not going to get a return on investment from an MBA. I think if you're earlier in your career and you've done something that maybe is not finance, and you go and do an MBA with a finance bent, then it might help. So as with everything, it depends on your situation. So I think they are valuable, but only given certain contexts.
This will be our final question, but another one, it's a little longer, but I think worthwhile diving into. So the question goes, I studied finance and economics at university, and I did general accounting subjects. It seems that all the panelists come from an accounting background, and as a result of this, my current CFO role leans toward analysis of high-level accounts, financing, ROI projections, budgeting, and we'll move into capital raising as we're ready the business to make acquisitions. I'm feeling as though I should get some more accounting education, but I'm not interested in going back to university. Do you think this is necessary, and do you have any recommendations for upskilling? Anyone fancy giving that one a crack?
Yeah. Depending on the size of the organization, you can always find like that technical accountant to fill that void. So I think, is this Damien? I think he's probably got the real skills you need to be the CFO. You can learn that, you can outsource that accounting to a certain extent, and you'll probably pick it up quicker than the other way around. Yeah, I think it's harder to move from technical accounting into sort of operational CFO personally. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And I think, you can always pick up, even in the capital raising conversation, you've got some technical accounting bits, or you've got, there's plenty of bankers and network of specialists that you surround yourself with. I think that to me is a key bit, and then know enough to be dangerous in most areas. So.
I will get this quick question in, and we can say one or the other, I reckon. So we'll go around. Do you think an MBA or a GAICD is the more relevant postgrad study for the CFO path? Karma.
It depends. I've done GAICD, but our organisation is very much committee based, and so we've got a lot of committees and boards and things so the governance path for me made sense.
Andrew?
Whichever you're more interested in.
Rob?
You don't need any of those two to get on.
There's
plenty of CFOs, including me, who haven't got those qualifications.
Great. I really enjoyed all of those answers. Guys, we've gone slightly over, so I won't take up any more of your time. Again, so grateful for you all for sharing your time and experience with us. A lot of thank yous coming in. So everyone, really appreciative. If you do have any more questions, feel free to jot them in, and we'll do our best to come back to you via email. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a delightful afternoon, and I will speak to you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.